Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill sitting here Saturday morning, and we spent most of our Friday night talking about this conversation and said, hey, I would kind of like to hear how the Miami Hurricane fans feel about this conversation. Is it college football playoff or bust for Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes heading into 2025? There's a couple of different talking points and parts of this conversation I want to get into. Like, number one, evaluating this roster. Is the college football playoffs the expectation? Should it be the expectation for this football team in 2025? We both kind of agree it is, and we'll get into that. But the number two conversation, I think the more fascinating conversation to get into is, let's evaluate where Mario Cristobal is with this Miami Hurricanes program going into 2025 and kind of evaluate the job he's done during his time at Miami, where I think there's a lot of positives. Like, I'm looking at my note sheet and say the positives certainly outweigh the negatives, but there are certainly some questions that we still have about Miami and Mario Cristobal going into 2025 that we want to see answered. Fired up to get into this conversation. Before we do, and as always, to the Miami Hurricane fans, please let it fly in the comment section. Dill, I think the whole point of us doing this episode is really to hear how the Miami Hurricane fans are feeling rolling into 2025. Let it fly in terms of, do we think it's college football playoff or bust? How do we grade and evaluate what Mario Cristobal has done at Miami until this point? Let it fly. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I will kick this one off with you here. Is it college football? Should it be college football playoff or bust for the Miami Hurricanes in 2025?
Yeah, I think it has to be. And that's
Yeah.
both a credit and maybe like you got to make it happen as well. Like Mario
Yep.
Cristobal's gotten this program to where I mean, they should be the top dog in the ACC right up there with Clemson. They are the two big boys in that conference, clearly. Now he does need to take this team because you look talent to talent, it's kind of there now, or it at
It
least
is
feels
there.
there to me,
Yeah.
where it looks they should be a perennial playoff contending team. And they don't necessarily need to make it every year, but they should be right there. And at this point, he's into year 4. You got to make it now because
Yeah,
there's
Dill,
no
I'll argue this. Like, the resources that Mario Cristobal has been given during his time at Miami, the roster that he's been able to put together, and you credit Mario Cristobal too for getting those resources and putting together the roster. I look at what Miami is doing every single offseason, how they recruit the high school ranks, how they use the transfer portal. I am kind of getting to that point where I really do think this team should be consistently making the college football playoffs, especially in the landscape of the ACC, where you're blowing these teams out of the freaking water when it comes to talent acquisition. And like yourself, I look at the ACC this year and say, it's Clemson and Miami, and it's really nobody else. And so I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, it's college football playoff or bust. And I know the national media wants to make a really big deal about losing Cam Ward. And look, y'all know how I feel about Cam Ward. He's a dude. I'm not very worried about Carson Beck coming in with the ground game that they're going to have. This offense, although it's going to look different, is still going to be a very good offense. The only thing that prevented you from making the college football playoffs last year was that defense. And I'll go to my grave, Dill. I'll go to my grave saying, if Miami just had an average defense in the month of November, not only would they have made the college football playoffs, they would have been a team that other teams didn't want to go see. Because I'm not sure how many of those teams in the college football playoffs could just straight up score with Miami in the 2024 year. And so you went out and said, hey, completely change the personnel, completely changed the coaching staff. You were given the resources to address the things necessary. Now you got to go out and make it happen.
Yeah, and I don't want to make this sound like this is a criticism of Mario at all, because he has gotten this program back. I mean, they're
Yeah.
so relevant. They're really, really good. But that
I
also does reset the expectations now. And that's also like he's
yeah.
making a lot of money at Miami. They're giving him pretty much what he needs to compete at the highest level of college football. And he is making use of it for sure. It's not like he's squandering it. But now this is year 4. Haven't made it yet. They got to make it happen.
I think the last 5 minutes of our discussion was almost that it should be a compliment to Mario Cristobal, because it's like this is the conversation. We weren't having this conversation 5 years ago about Miami. Now we are. And that's credit to what Mario Cristobal has done with this program. Getting into the positives, Dill, I'd start with what you just talked about. Like the overall perception of this football team feels different than it was 5 years ago, not only in terms of expectations, but like let's go look at, going out and beating a team like Georgia out for Jackson Camwell, going out and landing a guy like Cam Ward, not only landing Cam Ward, but taking him into your program and developing him into the number 1 overall draft pick. These are things that we didn't talk about regarding Miami 5 years ago. So the perception certainly has changed. How about this one, Dylan? I want you to speak on this. The culture that he's built. And there's this like national media narrative that whenever guys go to Miami, the NIL conversation gets brought up. And look, I'm not denying the fact that Mario Cristobal and Miami are players in NIL, just like every other national championship caliber football team. Although the national media wants to paint this picture, that doesn't really seem to be the reality of what's going on within the program. Like,
well, my issue is you look at other teams like Tennessee, you look
Florida
at Ole
State
Miss,
had some issues with this.
You look at all these teams are having like legit public issues where teams are USC was having them for like before. Like you've seen so many teams kind of almost go down with that. Miami, you never hear a peep from their big dogs. Their big dogs aren't out in public being like, I'm not getting enough money. I'm not getting this. They're not leaving Miami. They're not losing kids they don't want to lose from their high school classes. And they're putting guys into the draft. Like you're starting to see guys really develop really well at Miami. So I just look, this whole thing, it's all about money. And I know that it did feel like maybe they were a little bit more public facing with some of their NIL pursuits, if you will.
I think that's fair.
But that's not to say that like Tennessee and Oklahoma and Georgia, like, okay, maybe they're not as public facing with it, but they're still being really, really aggressive. And we all know that. I'll for the life of me don't get why. I think there've been a couple like Will Howard saying he only would have gone to Miami for money is like foolish. It's like, dude,
and the craziest part about that conversation is Will Howard got up there and said that after the NFL draft.
It's nuts.
And with all this ain't a shot at Will Howard, but dog, you went in the 6th round, I believe. Cam Ward went 1-1, and you're going to get up there and say all Miami had to sell was the beach and money.
But and I don't get why the media takes that and acts like that is the Miami program. Because again, it's a program that's developing guys at a really, really high level, and they're winning a lot of games. Like, they got to get over the hump for sure. But I just think this perception versus reality is way off because you just don't hear a ton of problems coming out of the Miami locker.
They've lost one guy that they haven't lost in the last 2 years, like Isaiah Horton, right? He's like the only. I was kind of looking at this. I was like, all right, who are the guys that Miami has lost that they didn't want to lose? Like it was maybe Colby Young a couple of years ago too. But it's like they don't lose guys that they don't want to lose, which I think speaks to the culture within this program. National media don't want to give it credit for. I think Mario Cristobal knows the truth, and I think we see the truth in terms of the culture that we see on this football team. Last thing that he does really well, you're talking positives like roster building, but I do have an interesting conversation. So obviously Mario Cristobal has done a great job building this roster. Like there's a reason we're talking about this team as a college football playoff caliber team in 2025 because I think they have the roster to do it. Do you think they're over relying on the portal? And the only reason I bring it up is because I think historically Mario Cristobal has done a really good job, right? Balancing the high school trail and the transfer portal. Like there are programs that don't balance it very well. Like you could argue that Clemson in the past has done a really good job on the high school ranks and player development, but ignoring the portal has probably cost them football games. Then you look at teams like Ole Miss and Colorado and say, done a really good job in the portal, but ignoring the high school ranks has probably cost them some sustainability within their program. I look at Miami and say they're one of the programs that I think balances it pretty dang well, where we're going to do a really good job on the high school ranks, but we're also going to improve this team in the portal. The reason I bring it up is 19 transfers this offseason. Year 4 under Mario Cristobal, to me, that seems like a higher number than I would like. What are your takes on how Mario Cristobal has gone about building this roster over the last
My one pushback on that is I feel like in the spots that you don't necessarily want a ton of transfer activity, they don't have a ton of it. Like their offensive line built homegrown, they're always really, really good.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, they'll add a James Brockermeyer. I think teams should go out and do that. But like you look, that's pretty much 4 guys who are guys who Miami has grown and developed, and they're awesome. I look at their defensive line, like they'll add some pieces for sure, but the bulk of that is going to be Miami guys.
Yeah.
It gets into like a little bit of the negative. Miami has at times, it feels like, missed really badly in certain areas of this team that's cost them. Like that secondary, I
Yeah.
don't know how else you could have built that without taking 5, 6, 7 guys
Yeah.
because it
Agreed.
had to be kind of flushed out and just reset
Yeah.
because it was that bad
It
last year.
I actually I think that's a really good point. You know, it's you look at the teams that have to go to the portal and grab multiple guys along the lines of scrimmage. Those are the teams that seem to struggle in the portal. Miami doesn't struggle at that position. I guess that what I'm looking at is like, all right, I want to look at Ohio State last offseason, going on and win a national championship. They only took 7, but the 7 guys they took were all like legitimate difference makers. You know, Caleb Downs, Will Howard, Quinshawn Judkins. If you can cut that number in half, you know, take that 19, cut it to 8, then it allows you to go out and get probably just a little bit more higher caliber players that really can impact this football team. Michigan kind of the same way in 2023. They only took 9. Like you look at the national championship teams, they use the portal, but it's a little bit more of quality over quantity. And sometimes it's felt like Miami's done a little bit more of quantity over quality.
Well,
And that,
in fairness, like those programs have been kind of built over a much longer period of time.
yeah,
Now,
fair, very
again,
fair.
like I feel like Miami is trending in the right direction. I look at the most where most of their impact players are going to come from, aside from probably that secondary spot. The bulk of it is still going to be homegrown guys. Like I still even look. I know they took a lot of wide receivers. I still frankly think like their young guys are probably going to be the players in this room for the
Yeah,
most part. So I look like again there were some holes that they needed to address. And it was really just the wide receiver and secondary spots that you felt like there was like a real overhaul, if you will, or just more additions
but
than
you
maybe you
needed it.
want to see. But you needed it. And it is like, again, he is only into year 4. It's not like he's been there for like 7, 8, 9 years like Harbaugh was or what Ryan Day was or Kirby
Yep.
Smart. Like
Smart.
I still think like in terms of just pure roster building, that to me is like what Miami is doing really well. I love what they've been able to do.
I think that's very fair. And it was probably a little bit nitpicky, but that's like where we're at with Miami. Is like when you want to go from like a top 15 team to a top 5 team to a national championship team, you got to start getting nitpicky
And
because
frankly, when you get into the negatives, like some of the on-field play and some of the areas they've missed and missed really bad, like you can't trot a secondary out there that is
yeah,
at the level that they just trotted out there. That to me is like, again, why did they need to use the portal really aggressively? Well, there was something wrong with how they were recruiting, how they were developing,
yeah,
just getting that secondary to not play at a horrible level. They had to reset it. So again, that's like a mix of like positive and negative. I think you look at the bulk of this roster, it's national championship ready, but they've been like it feels like in each year almost they've
they've
had a
had like
really
this
critical.
Achilles. Yeah. They've failed to have that complete team. They've had some really good aspects of football teams, but you haven't checked all the boxes. That is probably a very fair negative. I have two kind of fair like the glaring negatives and negatives that quite frankly need to get cleaned up or it's not going to work at Miami. Number one's like the on-field stuff, right? And that like we go back to 2023 with Georgia Tech, or obviously you go to a team like Syracuse and like the collab. I mean, you were winning by two touchdowns plus to go to the ACC championship game, to go to the college football playoffs, and you just fall apart. The on-field stuff, you need that to get cleaned up. Number two, and I think it's probably the most important conversation, and probably has to do with some of the on-field stuff, is coordinators. It's not been a great track record, right? Miami's on their 3rd defensive coordinator, their 2nd offensive coordinator. Mario Cristobal is only going into year 4. Here's the most important part, and Dill, I'm not getting up here and saying Mario Cristobal does not know football, because he obviously does. He's not a guy that was like Kirby Smart or like Lincoln Riley that cut their teeth coaching X's and O's. Like Kirby Smart on defense, Lincoln Riley coached Sark on offense. He was an offensive line coach that got elevated to a head coach because of what he can do creating culture and what he can do recruiting. And I still maintain that those are probably the 2 most important aspects of a head coach in this modern era of college football. But it makes it more important for Mario Cristobal to get the coordinators right, because he's not a guy that if things are falling apart on the defense, he can't just like take the reins like Kirby Smart could and fix it. Same thing on the offensive side of the football. And so I look at it and say, for Mario Cristobal especially, coordinator hires are always going to be very, very big. And he's missed on a couple of coordinator hires early in his tenure because he's gone through a lot of coordinators. It ain't like those guys are getting elevated to head coaches. They're getting fired. Corey Hetherman, Shannon Dawson, you got to hit on these two because you have the roster to go make it happen. Now you got to go hit on the coordinators.
And I think you feel really good about where you're at with Dawson. I think Dawson's done a really good job.
He's awesome.
Tyler Van Dyke, he kind of killed him in 2023. You just like when you turn the ball over at the rate he was doing it, it's really hard to be effective. But I think Shannon Dawson, I'm really comfortable with that hire. Yeah, you said it. Like Corey Hetherman, it does almost feel like a bit of a make or break for Mario Cristobal.
Yeah,
they have to cycle another defensive coordinator out. I think really good DCs are probably going to have big time questions about coming to Miami because again, it's really derailed Josh Gaddis' career going to Miami. So that wasn't Miami's fault necessarily. Josh Gaddis maybe just isn't that coordinator, if you will. But Corey Hetherman's going to be huge for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Gaddis was a little different on the offensive side of the football. And we're Michigan fans. We weren't even convinced like Josh Gaddis was great at Michigan because it wasn't really his offense that led Michigan to the playoffs before he went to Miami. And I think that's why he went to Miami, to try to run his own offense, and it turns out he can't. All right, that was a little unnecessary side note on Shannon Dawson from my part. Yeah, Corey Hetherman, make or break. And it was kind of an interesting hire because it's not like he's like a grizzled defensive coordinator veteran, right? He's kind of not necessarily a young guy, has been a journeyman. I think it was a Greg Schiano special, quite frankly. I think Mario Cristobal obviously has been very, very close with Greg Schiano throughout his coaching years. And he probably talked to Greg Schiano and said, hey, this Corey Hetherman guy is a stud. And if you hit on Corey Hetherman, again, this team I feel like is off to the races. We'll close it out there. Again, it's hard to argue. Like the mere fact that we're talking about playoff or bust for Miami tells you the job that Mario Cristobal has done, but there's still wood to chop. There's still things that Mario Cristobal needs to clean up. And if he does, this team's got levels that they can reach that not many other programs across the country can. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.